Did you know that 40,000 people, 40,000, die each year in America alone from seasonal flu? And that there have only been about 10 recorded deaths from the recent swine influenza outbreak. And that many have advanced this, most notably Ron Paul, and very vocally his supporters, as a reason for why this swine flu thing is all media hype. It's blown completely out of proportion, and that really it's not that big of a concern. The argument has several issues, most notably historic, in that it's as valid today. This sort of argument is as valid today as it was in 1917. The big problem being is that in 1918 there was the Spanish flu pandemic, the influenza pandemic, and it killed about 50 million people, comparable to the entire death toll of World War II. And that too started out by killing 10 people. That was, it started out as a mild influenza, didn't have a particularly high mortality to it. And then it mutated into something more aggressive and spread through the world's population and killed 50 million people. The second problem with this argument is it lacks a certain acknowledgement of the hazard of contagious diseases. Most viruses, most seasonal viruses, seasonal flu, sorry, most people have some native immunity to them. So if one person with the flu comes into contact with 4, maybe only 1 will actually develop the virus. And this can go on to generation 2, generation 3, 4 and 5, such that after 5 generations you have a total of maybe 5 people with this seasonal cold. Now this is the sort of thing that kills 40,000 people each year. But those 40,000 tend to be the weak and the sick, people who are hanging on anyway. How is this different from a pandemic? Well, with a pandemic, no one has any native immunity to it. Such as in the first generation, all the people who come exposed to it develop the virus. And each one of those comes into contact with, say, 4 people. And such that at generation 2, you have 16. Generation 3, you have another 64. At generation 4, you have 256. For generation 5, you have 1,024. Which means in total, after 5 generations here, you have about 1,300 cases of the virus versus 5. And this is the key difference. This is the key difference between the seasonal influenza and a pandemic, right? The fact that they're both influenzas is almost a point of complete irrelevance. The fact that this one kills 40,000 a year is a point of almost complete irrelevance. The problem is this one has pandemic potential. Not only does it have pandemic potential, it's unknown if this thing will actually mutate into something that has a significant mortality to it. And just to put this all into harsh perspective, if this was the bird flu, the avian flu that we were looking at, and not the swine flu, the bird flu currently has a mortality rate of about 50%. That's about 50% of those who contract it die. So there is significant hazard in all this. There is significant hazard in the pandemic that you don't get out of the seasonal influenza. Now let's put some sort of rough time scales on this. Let's say it's about 5 days per generation, which means that this is about 25 days worth, about a month. So after a month you can go from 1 case to 1,000 cases. Right? 1 case to 1,000 in a month. After 2 months you're up into the millions. After 3 months you're up into the billions, which is comparable to the world's population. So, whereas in this case, of course, you would have 15 cases after 15 days. After 15 generations. So, what can you do about this? Well, the first is, of course, as an individual, you need to understand how viruses are spread. And the main mechanism is people get infected with them, they cough them out, those go everywhere, people then touch them, they touch their face, touch their mouth, gets into their respiratory system, and they become infected. So the simple hygiene protocols are: don't touch things, avoid lots of people in relatively confined spaces, and of course if you actually develop it yourself, try not to spread the germs, spread the virus everywhere. Okay, and by following these simple things like washing your hands, let's just say for sake of argument that instead of going to 4 people per generation, it goes to 3. Such that after 1 generation there are only 3 people who have it, after 2 generations 9, 3 generations 27, 4 generations is going to be about 80, 5 generations is going to be about 240. So just by following simple hygiene procedures over 5 generations, you can reduce the number infected with the virus from 1,000 to about 250. So relatively minor things can have significant impact on the spread of the virus. The second thing you can do is you can have government organisations that have preparedness for this sort of thing. And the most obvious one would be, say you can deploy, this is 10 days, right? 2 generations is about 10 days. And the current one, the current virus, you know this from the recent swine flu outbreak, is that the virus can spread worldwide very easily in 10 days. But let's just say that you have a government organisation that is ready for this and can respond within 10 days, and they actually manage to isolate and mostly contain the disease at that point. They can put all those resources into 10 cases. Whereas if you had actually left your response time till the end of the month, then you have 100 times as many cases to deal with, and containment obviously becomes much harder. But let's say that you actually mostly shut it down. Let's say that 1 case gets through and that goes to 3 and 9. So by having government preparedness, the total cases on this line here are about 20 versus 240 if there was no government preparedness for this. And also you can make a very good argument for this point that your chances of contracting the virus depend on the health care of those around you. And a case can be made that in the event of a pandemic, social health care, giving away health care to everyone for free isn't so much a matter of philanthropy as a matter of self-preservation, in that if you actually have people out there in society who can't get any health care or are afraid that they can't afford it, then these people enhance the propagation of the virus through the population. A third way that you can help reduce the potential spread of the virus is through countering disinformation, and one of the most egregious ones I've come across is a guy called Alex Jones, who says the virus is all part of an illuminati conspiracy to control people's minds, and that really people don't need to be concerned about it. It's all the government trying to generate fear to control you. And I find that egregious on so many levels, in that, first of all, no one ever releases these viruses into the environment. Once they're in the environment, they can mix with other viruses, you've lost complete control of them. Right? No one releases viruses into the environment deliberately. The second is, of course, let's just say that 1 person in 4 buys into this conspiracy thing and decides they're not going to follow any of these hygiene things. They're just designed to generate fear. Let's take this guy here. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that 2 follow the hygiene procedures, but this guy is a conspiracy guy. So at the first generation you have 2 cases. At the next generation you have 4, and the next you have 8, 16 and 32, which means in total here you have about 50 cases of the virus versus 5, and that's just from having 25% of the population reject these safety procedures because they think it's all a conspiracy. Their ignorance is a hazard to us all. So what's the take-home message from all of this? Well, firstly, do not underestimate the hazard of a pandemic simply because a pandemic does not arrive every time there is the potential of one. Sooner or later something like this will likely sweep through the population of the planet, and in such an event there are things that you can do to minimize the potential spread of that virus. Those are actually having knowledge of how viruses spread such that you can minimize them yourself. And the second one is you can actually have infrastructure in place that can help shut down the virus early and minimize the potential spread of the virus. So it all boils down to knowledge enables prevention, and preparation reduces potential hazards.